so high. People are getting drunk on it, and that's, I think, why so much is coming in. And this is not a wine for that. This is a wine to taste and to enjoy all those strawberry flavors and that delicious acid and the length on it and the beautiful minerality that they've been able to achieve in that bottle.
I will say that my favorite rosé-based cocktail that I've never been able to duplicate at home, I actually had in San Luis Obispo, California, 2 summers ago, and it was Californian rosé. They wouldn't say which one. Combined with the Californian grappa, they wouldn't say which one. Campari and their own blend of their house-made bitters, which obviously included a whole bunch of spearmint because it was absolutely minty as anything. I could have drank like a fish tank of that. I'd have died, but I could have.
It sounds like your next day probably would have killed you more than the drunk that night itself.
That's very true, yes. All right, so let's go from very well-made but not desperately serious rosé onto, you know, rosé from a very serious winery, but it's not serious enough to shop on their website, the Domaine de Chevalier.
Yeah, so basically, they don't advertise this wine. We import a lot of Bordeaux, and we import it 3 times a year because the popularity of Bordeaux has gone crazy. I can't even express. We were bullish. We've been bullish on it for 20 years, and we've been trying to sell it. We've been selling it successfully, but in the last 5 years, the Bordeaux sales have absolutely gone crazy. And we were never offered this wine before. They've only been producing the Rose de Chevalier, the Rosé de Chevalier, for 5 or 6 vintages now, and we were offered some 18 months ago. We tried it, and we're just absolutely blown away by it. What I love is that we went, and a testament to your introduction as well, we're going from something fun and cheerful and delicious and red fruity and clean to something that has all of those qualities, and then add in 12 different flavor profiles. I mean, this rosé actually has depth and length and a nose that moves into a front, mid, and back palate and has a finish. And I mean, I can't say that for many rosés. And
we're doing all that for an extra $5 a bottle.
Which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
So that thing is like, as you were mentioning before as well, rosé, I think, has a peak, and wineries just don't understand that. I think that they think that people are just going to buy because it's there. But in our opinion, with my company, and I believe like you and I are very like-minded that way, we don't import anything more than like really this price for rosé, and we feel that this is the mountaintop. I think there's enough depth and interest and flavor and history and pedigree in this wine, and you can all have it all for, I think you have it on your shelf for $28, I would guess, somewhere around there.
27, but yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, a little. Do we want to go into a little bit of history about the house?
Yeah, let's go into a little bit of history about the house, and let's talk a little bit about Pessac-Leognan. It's my favorite of the major Bordeaux regions. It's a sub-region of the Grave. It's a left bank region, but it's really well set aside from the classical Médoc. Completely different soil types than the rest of the left bank. And it's predominantly, of all of the major Bordeaux regions, it's the only one that's predominantly white. And again, we'll dig into white Bordeaux, obviously, with the Chateau Reynon more, but to dig into Grave, I mean, this is a white wine region that makes some really world-class reds, like, of course, you know, Château, but they also make these really cracking rosés, but they're making rosé from a region that's 3/4 planted white, I want to say. About maybe it's actually closer to 80%. It's a huge percentage swing towards white for this, and it's the only Bordeaux region that's like that at all. Like, you look like Margaux or Saint Julien, where it's 95 red, and here it's actually mostly white, and yet they make fabulous red wines from it. It's such an odd duck. It's like Chablis of Burgundy. It's kind of this little bit that sticks off, kind of as the appendix of it. That's completely different than the rest, but kind of grouped in. And I love Pessac-Leognan for that. And if I'm gonna bring in a Bordeaux rosé, it has to be from Pessac-Leognan, and I absolutely love this. And I will say, I do carry a $30 rosé. I carry Ryan Sturms, because it's 99% Riesling with 1% Zin just poured in for color. And it's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. Ryan's, we've had him on as a guest before. It's a wonderful rosé. But talk us through Rosé de Chevalier, talk us through the house.
Yeah, so Domaine de Chevalier is really like aside from Aubryon, I mean, historically, it's the most historical winery in the area. It's based in Léognan, which is the capital of Grave, and they've been making some of the most highly rated red product in all of Bordeaux for a long time. The nice thing is, as you had mentioned, Pessac doesn't. I mean, its reputation, particularly as far as the trade goes, because in the end, Bordeaux pricing is all built on how much people are willing to.
You can just call it hype and bullshit.
Okay, Bordeaux is all hype and bullshit. But it's basically all the pricing is based on why is my brain not working? Sorry, it's based on what people are willing to pay at auction, and then the trickle down price goes from there. So basically, people who have sellers who are willing to trade, if the price goes up on the auction items, then the rest of Bordeaux goes up. Pessac really only has one item on that market, and it allows it to kind of over deliver at all price points. I mean, Domaine de Chevalier, the red, isn't cheap. I mean, in your store, it would be, I would guess, around $160 to $180 for the vintage that we have right now. But their quality and a testament to their ownership is that consistently for the last 100 years they've made incredible wine. The winery basically the winery started in 1783, and it's been kind of owned by the same families, not blood, but the same families since then. So the winery is basically planted mostly with Cabernet Sauvignon, with a little bit of Merlot and a little bit of Cab Franc. 30% Merlot and a little bit of Cab Franc, Petit Verdot. And then in the whites, it's Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, which are the kind of the primary blends for making the great white wines of Bordeaux. What's neat about this wine is that this isn't some separate process. This is a saignée method, which means to bleed in English. And so basically what happens is they put out everything in tank, they put the skins in, and then once it achieves rosé color, they bleed off each tank to have the rosé on the side. So you're basically drinking a kind of youthful introductory version of a very high pedigree red wine, kind of before the skins and all that process and oak happens, which to me is such a wonderful idea and such a neat kind of way to consume wine.
It's a vastly better idea than Beaujolais Nouveau, yes.
Yeah, very much so. Hilarious.
He hated my joke. No, it's fine. I'll take your pity. Hilarious. I get it.
I didn't hate the joke at all. Beaujolais Nouveau can be just terrible sometimes.
Oh, God, it's dreadful. Especially the plastic bottles. No.
Totally.
Save me from Georges Duboeuf. I can't do it again.
Well, it's all just a marketing ploy anyways, to throw a party and to sell people wine that isn't very good.
Of course it is.
So what I love about this wine, and which I don't think you get in Provençal Rosé because of the blend of kind of Cinsault and Grenache and Syrah, this being predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon with some Merlot in it, is you're getting a little bit more lushness. It's a little bit more fresh. Instead of just being strawberry, you get some cherry, you're getting some interesting banana notes, some mango. There's like zestiness to it, like an orange zest, which I absolutely adore, not just in white wine, but in rosés as well. But it's also extremely fresh, and it's like delightfully easy to drink for something that has such a wonderful concentration of flavor and depth. And I also love the length on it because it sits with you, but it's not invasive in any way. It sits for a while. It sits for 30, 45 seconds, but it's still clean and delicious and delightful on the palate.
I wouldn't have bought in with all the stone fruit and mango until you said it. The orange is there, the mango is there. Not getting the banana, I'll be honest, it's just no. But I do get the mango. That's actually quite interesting. One thing I'll ask though, Bordeaux Rosé, it's never been it's never been a big deal. You know, Bordeaux has red and white. They could make Cremant de Bordeaux. I've seen one in the flesh once. But like Cremant de Loire, Rosé de Loire, Cremant de Bourgogne, Burgundian Rosé, they're all things. Champagne has, like, of course, you know, pink champagne, but even on the still side, they do occasionally do champagne rosés. Bordeaux kind of doesn't, mostly because they can sell it all probably for more money as red and whites. Cremant and Rosé from Bordeaux have had a bit of a tough road. You don't see them very often, especially from top estates. And I think that's largely driven by price. This is, I think, for, as you said, the red wine's 160, the Rosé's 27, and they're coming from the same fruit. Maybe it's a silly question to ask, why aren't they doing it more? Well, obviously, Kyle, you idiot, they're doing it because they're selling it for less than a fifth of the price. But is there a future for Bordeaux Rosé, or is this something we're only going to be drinking for the next few years, and then ultimately it's just going to end up all being red because they can sell it for more money?
All right, I'm going to be slightly hypocritical. We brought in 30 cases of, are you familiar with Chateau Giscourt or Giscourt?
Yep.
It is the neighbor of Chateau Margaux. It is from Margaux. We sold that rosé. I guess your store price would be almost $60, maybe $56. It is probably the most concentrated and brilliant rosé I've ever tasted. And we sold all 40 cases before it arrived. And we didn't sell it to, this wasn't kind of like when you were saying my mommy drinks wine kind of drinkers. These were people, these are our collectors. These are men and women who are enophiles, who have cellars, who take all this stuff very seriously. And it absolutely blew them away. We are the only importers of quality Bordeaux rosé in the market, and we're almost sold out. So I think that people are ready. I think that fun side of it, that poolside patio thing, did really well for rosé and increased its exposure. But I think that people have all tried it, and they're willing to move on and try some things that have a little bit more depth and have a little more interest. And Bordeaux is 100% the place to do that. The only issue is that, as you mentioned before, the product line, the availability will obviously be limited because the value of Bordeaux, the simple land value of Bordeaux is so high that it translates into the wine prices, and the rosés will, I mean, as you agree, and I think as the people who own Domaine de Chevalier agree, rosé should never be expensive.
Yeah. But when it's really that good, it's allowed.
It's allowed, yeah. Well, when I come to visit you next, I will bring a bottle of the Giscourt rosé, and you will enjoy it.
Yep. If nothing else has come out of tonight, I'm getting to drink that wine, and it was all worthwhile. Let's stay with Bordeaux. Let's move on to Château Reynon and Denis de Bordeaux, the man who literally revolutionized and brought back Bordeaux white. We're coming from Pessac-Leognan, and we're actually not drinking something. I don't think this is from Grave. Actually, doesn't have. It's just Bordeaux AOC, isn't it?
Pardon me?
It's just Bordeaux AOC. It's not actually from anywhere.
It's his personal property. It's where he lives, and it's his personal vineyard. Well, it was his personal vineyard.
And most of his holdings around Cadillac, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is on the island of Alta de Mer, but it's a separate AOC. Sorry, you're stretching my Bordeaux knowledge because down here we don't sell a whole lot of Bordeaux. Yeah.
No, please. Yeah. So the vineyard itself, sorry, sorry, you guys. I apologize, everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're checking your notes. I'm doing all this just freehand. I have a receipt with our retail prices on it.
That's good. No, I have notes. Yes, I try to make sure.
I'm just giving you a bad time.
It's in Cadillac, in Berguet, so in Béguet, pardon me, and it's a right bank, south-facing slope, and his house is on this property. So he actually owns two properties. This is the one that is personal to him and where his home is, and then he has another property in another part of Grave where he makes Claude Faleviden, which is a wine that for some reason costs more and has a little bit more mouthfeel to it, a little bit more kind of ripeness, but is not rated as well as this one, which is pretty sweet.
No,
Uh,
and as we were talking about earlier, this is the final wine of Denis du Bordeaux because he passed away the next year of cancer at 67.
yeah,
Um, and let's talk about his contribution to like how Bordeaux white was perceived as a wine before his lifetime, and then he's considered the most famous wine scientist of the 20th century. He comes in, he literally revolutionizes Bordeaux white. And this was the last wine he ever made, and it's a Bordeaux white. This is, I think they have way more fans to the rosés because this is a really, really interesting and complex wine and difficult to like, I think, in some respects. But this is the coolest thing we've maybe ever had on this. And yes, you've got a 2011, I know, because you're just the cool kid on the block. But this is amazing. Like we have the final Bordeaux white from the person who basically created Bordeaux white as we know today,
yeah.
is what's in our glasses, and that's incredible. So, talk us through this one.
Um, so he basically his history is he is obviously a winemaker, but also a a professor of enology at the University of Bordeaux. And his big claim to fame was research. So basically, he was the director of like brutal translation of the Institute of Sciences of Vine and Wine at the University of Bordeaux, and he specialized in white. So if we want to really get nerdy, which I generally don't do, so I'm
No,
only
we definitely want to get that nerdy.
wine is also about having a science kit, and his science kit and his brain were the best in Bordeaux as far as white went. Is the easiest way to explain it. He did so much agronomical research, and he worked with engineers on how to move agriculture forward in Bordeaux. So he earned a lot of respect doing that. And while he was doing that, and because he was really fascinated and where he grew up was where the white grapes grow, he was able to make wines for very famous houses like Doisy-Dain, Floridain, and he also made 3 vintages of Cheval Blanc, which is, I think, probably the biggest feather in his cap as far as that goes, because that wine is obviously one of the top, I mean, personally, top 10 wines made in the world.
I've never had the opportunity to try it. But what's a bottle of current release Cheval Blanc? Like just the
I
red,
think
the Grand Vin?
we'll release the Grand Vin at about 30. So in your store, it would be about $1,800.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we're selling
So
this for the princely sum of $24.95. Yeah, I absolutely love this about Bordeaux. Is we've talked about this a little bit when we did Bordeaux Week. Is Bordeaux is very much a thing of the haves and have-nots. They hired Denis de Bordeaux to make their Château Le Cheval Blanc, and it's $1,800 a bottle. But you actually go and look into it, and the man who made it in his own vineyard and his own property, it's $25 a bottle because it's not one of those magical 1866 classification wines, which is just the dumbest thing.
well, it's not being traded on the auction market.
Exactly.
To be perfectly honest with you, I can access every first growth wine. I can have pretty much anything except for 2 wines. One of them is Cheval Blanc, and the other one is made by Christian Mouilly, and I'm not going to say its name because it's the most overpriced wine on the planet. But
More than Screaming Eagle? Good heavens.
well, it's a lot more than Screaming Eagle, but yes. So yeah, I mean, it's just so fortunate to be able to try the wine, and I wanted to retract back to what was your description on its flavor profile when we were moving into this? Did you say it's hard to take? Is that what you said?
It's not hard to take. It's a Sauvignon Blanc, and I think for a lot of people, when you take a glass of wine, you say, well, this is going to be X. Sauvignon Blanc, most people are going to associate immediate grapefruit and gooseberry and lime and grass, and those notes are in there. But if you told me this was, Sauvignon Blanc, I don't know if I would get that in a blind tasting. In fact, if you just put this in front of me in a blind tasting, I would probably get it wrong. I'd probably pick Chenin or maybe something really weird like a Elise-aged Albarino or something. This, I think, to most people, isn't going to taste particularly like a Sauvignon Blanc. And it's not straight Sauvignon. It's got Semillon in it as well. But it's not what a lot of people are expecting.
100% soft. No
It's sorry?
Semillon. 100% Sauv in this wine.
Really?
No Semillon, yeah. The Reynon can be blended in this particular vintage. It's 100% Sauv, yeah. So it's weird that you pick up, like I pick up Semillon notes as well. I feel like it has that Semillon oiliness and that depth of color.
And that's why I kind of said Chenin is it's got that beeswax, lamb's wool sort of oily slickness. And I've had 100% Sauv Blancs that are like this. We actually have 100% botchertized Puy Fumé, or yeah, Puy Fumé, that's kind of like this. But it's not in any way typical Sauvignon Blanc. You know, if I was doing a Sauvignon Blanc tasting for a bunch of like, you know, first-time wine drinkers, if I was teaching my class at the college or something, I don't think I'd bring this except as a stinger to teach these kids like, oh, you all think you know what Sauvignon Blanc is. Well, you know, look what you don't know. But yeah, this to me is A, more interesting than most Sauvignon Blancs, certainly its price point, and B, compare this to
something from Loire.
I was gonna say New Zealand, but sure, something from Loire. Yeah, it's a completely different animal. It has nothing in common whatsoever.
Totally. I mean, if you get into some of the really heavy hitters from Loire, like if you've had wines from Didier Dagenot and things like that, this wine is comparable in many ways as far as its kind of mouthfeel development and its flavor structure and so on. Yeah, I mean, for me, this wine that you're having is a gem due to its rarity because the very famous winemaker who owned the property made it as fast, and this is his final vintage. But secondarily, you have a $24 bottle of white wine from Bordeaux that you can put in the cellar for 10 to 12, maybe 15 years. And it'll just grow and kind of mature and change and figure itself out. You're going to end up with a little bit more petrol towards the end of it and things like that. But it's such a wonderfully made bottle of wine and such a rarity. I mean, for me, Sauvignon Blanc is defined. At least I think it should be a fruitier wine. Who's stealing the rosé?
That'd be Aaron.
Yeah.
He likes to make it a big dramatic production when Aaron takes a bottle of wine. It's in this weird slow-mo fashion.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is that what characterizes great Sauvignon Blanc is not really any of those flavors that you said before. It's the peachy quality to me. If you ripen the fruit properly, you fermented it well. I mean, white peach to me is like defines quality Sauvignon Blanc. It's the flavor that I look for every single time I get into it, and I find that this one really, really has that. And like what I love too is from this area, a lot of the stickies, the white wines that are sweeter and left to hang a lot longer, they develop a lot of like black tea notes. In great Sauterne and things like that. And what I love about this one is it doesn't quite get the black tea side, but it has this like really lovely kind of like chamomile kind of flavor to it, which
there's a real white flower and tea character, but it's not. You're right. It's not black tea. It's
not black tea, which you get out of Sauterne, but you don't really get. This is like almost like a graduational period where Sauterne you get to the black, and this is more fresh flowers and things like that. And I also love that wonderful minerality, that steeliness, that purity. It's just, to me, I mean, I've drank a lot of wine in my life, and for me, I am truly proud to be able to offer something of this quality and this price point, and I'm sad that I'll never be able to get it again. And I just find it to be such a special bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, personally.
So is this going to be going up in price, or did this wine kind of disappear with the death of Denis de Bordeaux? Is this the last time we're ever going to see Château Reynon at this price?
So yeah, like the 2015, we brought in 2017 as well, and the 2017 wholesale is $6 more a bottle.
No thanks.
So that would translate.
It's cool, but that's a big step.
Big step, yeah. So really, in the end, this 2015 vintage, we were able to buy 40 cases of it, and we're down to about 10. And yeah, it's really the end of an era and the end of being able to have something like this in this range as well. Which
I do want to just touch on here where you know, some of these people treat wine a little bit like, you know, mayonnaise or ketchup, and it's like, well, there's always another bottle. Well, no, there's not, you know. You were saying with, I can't remember, it was the Escarole Le Chevalier, you asked for 70 cases and you got 35 because he just didn't make that much. You know, you say you got 40 cases of this, it's 480 bottles, that's just it. There isn't anymore. Like that's the end. And you know, yes, there'll be a 2017, but it'll be made by someone completely different, or at least it won't have Denis' own influence on it. It would be, I think Sun is the new winemaker, is he not? It's a new generation, and he was definitely involved in this wine. But it's not going to be exactly the same. It's going to be $6 more. Every wine is its own moment. You'll never have the climatic conditions that made this version of the Escarole, and you know, maybe Bordeaux wine prices will mean that the Rosé de Chevalier doesn't exist in 5 years because it's just suicidally unprofitable to keep making it. The Chateau Reynon, the guy died, and the Morellino de Scansano, I mean, it's kind of an odd one. I mean, 20 years ago, this was, you know, a malaria-ridden swamp, and maybe 20 years from now, it's going to be just even more cribbing on the fame of Sassicaia, and it's going to be out of this price point as well. Wine's transitive. Like, this is a wine tasting that we can do at this budget right now. In 10 years, this might be more or less expensive. Okay, in this particular case, almost certainly more. But it might not be possible. Every wine bottle is its own moment, not only agriculturally, but also in the moment in time in the wine industry. Right now, we're all taking advantage of horrifically low Spanish wine prices. That ain't gonna last forever. Eventually, Spain is gonna catch up to the rest of the world, and it's gonna catch up like a rubber band. It's gonna shoot up, in some cases, I'd bet double.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, the price increases outside of really have been quite linear, to be honest with you, year to year to year. And it just depends on whether or not North America chooses Spain as its new baby. And if it does, then unfortunately we're all going to be spending 30% more on Spanish wine in like a 5-year period.
And it doesn't just have to be North America. It could be the Indian subcontinent. It could be Japan. It's all these different markets. I mean, if, you know, let's just say that Japan decides that Maremma is its new baby, it won't be that, you know, Maremman wine prices go up here. It'll just be it disappears from the market, because why would they sell it for that price here when they can get way more in Japan? This is, to a certain point, what's happened to the single malt Scotch industry. Why aren't we getting the special releases we got 10 years ago? Because this is a mature market and people have a realistic expectation of what they used to pay, whereas in an emerging market like let's say India, because that's the big one that's driving up prices right now, it's a new market and people are willing to pay 50% more because they don't have a long-term expectation of what prices are like based on the long-term market presence like they have here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that really unprofessional thing that I do all the time and step away for a bathroom break. And I'm going to let you introduce the Italian red, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Shut up, Aaron.
Yeah, so we're moving on to the red. This is called Fattoria Le Pupille. It is quite a phenomenal winery. As Kyle had mentioned, the soil and that kind of area of Tuscany wasn't very highly rated for a long time. Basically, it was nothing, and they converted it into vinifera, and most of the wines were kept as low-end table wines. So about 20 years ago, when there was a consortium foundation made for Morellino di Scansano, they started to really change things. And basically there's a lady, her name is Elisabetta Japetti. She is the ambassador of Maremma. They call her the Lady of Morellino and the ambassador of Maremma. She was the consortium started in the 80s, and then she became the first woman consortium president. And her history is really quite phenomenal. At 20 years old, she wanted to become a winemaker, and she wanted to build up her area where she was born and grew up. And you just don't really hear stories like that.
Well,
you guys hear?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, please. I just heard them back.
I was actually going to just comment that you keep saying we don't hear stories like that. When it comes to women winemakers, we hear it about Italy so much with, Ariana Ojapinti and
Clara Gentili.
Yes, thank you. Italy seems to be like the heartland for amazing women winemakers, and I don't know why that is and why they don't get the same opportunity the rest of the world, but it seems like Italy's just, if you want to be an absolutely world-class, wildly acclaimed winemaker as a woman, you can do that 15 years earlier in your career in Italy than you can anywhere else in the world, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think it was all that catcalling from the Italian men. They just wanted to get out of the vineyards.
I did not catch any of that. Thanks for the audio, Aaron. Well done.
It's not my fault.
It's all Aaron's fault.
About Italian men catcalling them, so they wanted to hide in the vineyards.
There we go. Now we at least have audio again.
Yeah, it's really amazing that Italy's kind of at the forefront for female winemakers, and I think there's a culture there, and I also believe that the women are incredibly strong and hardworking, and I mean, that's really the only way you can get anywhere, whether you're a woman or a man. You have to basically bust your ass all day, and since she was 20 years old, she's been working very hard to become the woman that she is. What I love, too, about female winemakers is that it inevitably translates into the wines themselves and the way that they're kind of constructed and their profile. Like you were saying, blind, I don't think you could ever identify that a wine was made by a woman compared to a man. But once you start to see and you drink several vintages from different female winemakers, there's definitely I find a litheness, a prettiness to the winemaking styles generally that I'm very, very, I think is really awesome. So
I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I've identified a style because I don't think that I'd ever compare this to the wines of Ariano Cipinti or Valentina Pasicella or anyone else. I don't know, maybe you taste more wines than I do, but I couldn't say I've actually picked that up, no. Have we talked about Morellino di Scansano yet?
Nope.
As like a sub-region of Maremma? So I kind of introduced it, very sexily as this malaria-ridden swamp on the outskirts of Tuscany that nobody wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. And then all of a sudden Sassicaia became famous and everybody wanted a vineyard in Maremma because it was all of a sudden what all the cool kids did. But Morellino di Scansano is kind of the hilltops above the swamps. It's the most high-altitude sub-region of Maremma. It's perhaps the most historically important part of the region. This is, I didn't bring my tech sheet in with me. It's 85 Sangio, 10% Grenache, and 5%
Malvasia.
Is it Malvasia?
Yeah.
It's not what the website said, but that's all right. It was a grape I'd actually never heard of. It was something like Filiarello, and it was actually, I looked it up in the Oxford Wine Company. Apparently it was an ancestor of Sangiovese, and it's only grown in Maremma because everyone else in Tuscany, they've kind of uprooted it because it was too old-fashioned.
I mean, the winery and I have a close relationship, and to my understanding, it's 85 Sangio, 10 Alicante, and 5 Malvasia on the 2019 vintage.
Cool. I will take your word for it then. And I also do kind of get that oxidative Malvasia thing.
Honestly, I kind of take your word for it as well, because you never really know when they tell you these things.
No, you never do, because the story with winemakers always bloody changes, especially depending on how much they had to drink.
And yeah, I mean, between us, we both know that there's probably a middle between what you looked at and what I looked at. But that's the nature of the game, particularly when you're dealing with family-operated wineries. But yeah.
So it's kind of the historically important part of Maremma. And Maremma is so interesting. I mean, you've got these low-lying, sedimentary, kind of formerly swampy, but still very wet soils that are very often planted with a blend of Montepulciano and Sangiovese. And they make fruity, fun, not desperately interesting, very flabby red wines. And then up on the hillsides, they make very interesting things. I don't know, it's really hard to get a pulse on what Maremma is doing, because at the very top end, the wines are certainly very hyped, often way too hyped that they're expensive enough I've never tasted them in some cases. But on the lower end, yeah. Actually, I have a really good, interesting question from Deirdre here. How often do vineyards pull up roots due to being old-fashioned? Fun fact, they never pull up roots. Vines will be prolific. In fact, let's take that even a further step back. Vines, at least in Western Europe, are not planted on their own vine stocks because of phylloxera. Vitis vinifera grape varieties are very, very susceptible because they don't have a hard, waxy outer coating on the roots that is resistant to the phylloxera louse. So you could have Cabernet or Merlot or Sangiovese or Nebbiolo. It's not going to be planted on its own rootstock. It will be planted on a transplanted North American rootstock. Because of that, because none of these grapes are actually planted on their own roots, if, say, all of a sudden all of a sudden Tuscany decided Sangiovese was horribly unfashionable, they weren't going to grow it anymore, and they were going to plant Touriga Nacional because they're madmen, they wouldn't uproot anything. They would cut it off at the point where the root comes out of the ground, and they would just graft on whatever new grape they want. With Guyot training, it's not inconceivable that on a double Guyot, which is literally just one root base with two different canes of vine coming out of it, you could grow two different grapes off that root. That's not traditionally done, and I actually don't know why, but it's not. And no, you don't see that. But it's all grafting. So there's no uprooting by and large. The only times that vines are uprooted is when the rootstock gets old enough that the vine stops being prolific enough to make money. Because yes, if you're making wine at $150 a bottle, if you can advertise you have the oldest of, grapevines in Bordeaux and you only produce, 2 bunches per vine, you can do that. But if you're selling the wine for $24.95, you need to make a certain amount of grapes per vine to make a living. It's ultimately farming. So very often you'll see vines uprooted, not because they're bad, not because they want to change out what they're growing, but because they're not prolific enough and they're trying to hit a certain price point. So very long answer to a very short question. Does this mean we get fruit and wines quicker? Actually, no, because we need to establish the rootstock first. The rootstock has to be established with its own leaves and everything. It needs about 3 to 5 years to mature, more like 8 to 12 for really high quality wine. I don't think that, let's just use Domaine de Chevalier here. I don't think they're ever pulling grapes off 3-year-old vines. I would be absolutely shocked. And people who are spending $160 a bottle for it would be absolutely furious, as they should be. No, it's actually a year slower because they have to grow up the vine first and then they have to graft on, which takes the extra year. So it's actually slightly slower. It is quicker if you are growing a very commercial winery that's going to say, hey, this year Chardonnay is popular. Next year Sauvignon Blanc is going to be more popular. If you're doing that, which is not good winemaking and not in any way how we make anything that would show up on our table here unless I was going to make fun of it, in that sense, yes, it's quicker. But for most things, it actually just adds an extra year while they do the graft year. Sorry, Daryl, I kind of let you just sit there in silence for quite a while.
Well, I was listening intently. That was great. You're wonderful at explaining things quickly and concisely. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, grafting, these wines from Bordeaux that we pay so much money for, certain people are willing to pay for. Grafting saved Bordeaux many moons ago, and most of those roots certainly didn't come from France.
None of them came from France. I would be pretty well guaranteed. Yeah, no.
A large portion came from Chile, and yeah, it's interesting. But
I really hope the Chileans kind of turn it around on the Bordelais, where, the Bordelais sold them Carmenere predominantly as Cabernet and Merlot. I really hope that they ordered, I don't know, Mission or something from Chile, and they were just like, what's Mission? All of that. Why? Because fuck the Bordelais. Sorry, that's a bit of an aside.
It's amazing. Ooh. And the sad thing is Chile actually make incredible wine, and they have amazing terroir. The soil composition, the weather is incredible. We just don't really get a lot of that up here, which is a bit shameful. We just get the big producers.
We get a little bit of the interesting stuff. Some of the natural stuff from Mitata comes through on those volcanic soils, but it's only twice a year and it sells out pretty darn fast. And it's less than 1% of the Chilean market, because let's be fair, 99.999% of the Chilean market is not even Santa Rita Medal Real. It's inexpensive wedding jug wine and Carmen and like that.
Well,
Like
the trade
it's
those products
sad.
are everywhere in the world. Like every store, you can be in the middle. You can be in Guam, and there'll be Conchi Toro on the shelf there. It's crazy. So I don't know.
You know, it's kind of funny. I will say, so you've been doing this 25 years, I've been doing this 21. I can remember actually Marquez de Casa Concha Merlot being a pretty all right Merlot like 10-ish, probably more like 15-ish years ago. And it was being pretty okay. Concha used to do some pretty okay wines, not
That
not
Tarugno
that long ago.
and the Chardonnay was good from Marqués de Casa Concha as well. That was delicious wine back a few moons ago. And they made some single vineyard stuff, Tarugno, which was delicious. But I mean, if you're willing to spend the money, the flagship wine from them, Don Melchor, is absolutely delicious. It's just
Yes,
very,
it
very
is.
simple.
Yeah, it's the Napa Valley Cab of Chile, except it doesn't taste anything like Napa because they actually, try to reflect the terroir, which I really respect.
So,
And let's be also fair, like the sleeping dragon of the wine industry is just how bad Chilean and Argentine wine is right now. Like they're only sleeping because they're making 16.95 grocery store Malbec and grocery store Cabernet Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, depending on the country, Argentina formerly and Chile laterally. When they wake up and when the premium wines come into the market, I think we're going to see a second South American explosion, and it's going to be ridiculous on toast because they're going to come in so cheap and so good and so terroir focused. And I don't know how many of those like Chilean whites that you've had grown entirely on granite with that huge agave note. It's going to be dumb when they actually show up on a broader scale where they're not aping California wine styles in the 80s like they did in the early 90s and basically have remained set in stone since the early 90s in terms of winemaking.
yeah,
It's going to be really interesting when that changes.
Yeah, there'll be a renaissance there too. I'd like to see a renaissance come back for Australia as well because of all those millions they made when they sold wines like Yellowtail and I can't remember.
Wally's Hut, Kangaroo Ridge, Wallaby's Anus. I don't know, all of those. Take an animal part in an Australian animal, put a colorful label on it.
But they reinvested, man. Aussies aren't flashy people. It's not like they went and bought Ferraris and stuff. And the wines that are coming out of Australia right now are superlative. They're absolutely superlative. But just no one's willing to give them a chance at the moment, which is a shame because they're not cheap. They're like that Renaissance that you're referring to coming from Argentina. And those ones will stay low. And I mean, Australia's charging a little bit more, but you're getting some incredible quality in the $25 price range. Like, I mean, really amazing. Very terroir-driven wines, and no one's really batting an eyelash at them at the moment because we still have this kind of poor taste in our mouth from all those big displays of Wins, whatever.
Wins Coonawarra Cab, the Disney wine. Yes. Sorry, for anyone who didn't get that joke, Wins Coonawarra Cab got bought by Disney to serve on its cruise ship, so it went from being one of the biggest selling wines in Alberta to being unavailable for 2 years while they satisfied their Disney contract. But I will say there are some of them that are starting to come in. BK Wines is starting to come in. Yeti and the Coconut's coming through. And Yeti and the Coconut is super genius and super weird and wildly crazy. And like they have a $40 skin contact Gewürztraminer that I'm sold out on my third case at this point. And this is stupid. That shouldn't sell that well. It is very good, but it's a $40 Australian Gewürztraminer, which... okay, just settle down there for one, and then it's a skin contact semi-pet nat. Like, it's just dumb. I love that Australia's getting there, but they're almost having to get out of their own way, which I feel kind of bad about. Sorry, I got a question from the comments, too. I'll let you get this one. Deirdre asks, is vine age based on the roots rather than the age of the graft?
I can't answer that, to be honest with you.
Okay, yes, it is. Generally speaking, when they're talking about vine age, when we get into the really old stuff like the best Coonawarra stuff, best Concongela stuff, which is the name of their vineyard, it's because the vineyard was planted on original rootstocks in 1868 because of a weird quirk of their soil, which is because it's very sandy. Phylloxera it was too dry for the nematode to actually survive. So those are actually planted on original rootstocks. For the most part, when we're talking about vine age, it's the age of the rootstock. Very often the graft will be renewed or replaced every 2 to 3 years in the traditional Guyot system, just because the longer that it sits there, the more green growth that it will produce. And it doesn't want to be, at least as a winemaking side, you don't want to be producing that much green growth, leaves and stems and things. You want it to be producing fruit.
It's like when you see the 100-year-old vine Zinfandel from California. That vine hasn't been there for 100 years. It simply wouldn't produce fruit.
No.
Yeah. So it is the rootstock. And what's so interesting about roots is I don't know if I'm if everyone, it's common knowledge to everyone, but like I have wineries, for instance, in Australia and McLaren that I import, a little family-owned operated winery, and their root systems go down about 15 meters into the ground. And all of their vines are dry grown because there's they found the vines went and found the roots went and found their own aquifer, and they dry grow them all. And I mean, 15 meters to flavor a bunch of grapes is such an incredible idea, and it really is a testament to why kind of grapes are the mountaintop on the vegetable and fruit food chain. And there aren't a lot of things that do that. So. Yeah. Great question.
Awesome. Final thoughts, Daryl? We've tasted 4 of your wines. I think we've tasted a giant range of tastes.
Pardon?
We've tasted a giant range of different tastes. What are your final thoughts here? Like, where do you come down on this?
I would like to kind of discuss the Morellino as far as the wine itself, because we kind of talked about the area and the winemaker.
Yes, please.
But really get into it. So basically, it's Sangiovese Étal. Between us, there's a few different varietals in there. If you can look at while the wine's being poured, this wine, for me, is extremely special. One, I think that it's, and Andrew Hilton also, I think, really heavily supports this same idea. The flavor profile of wine and the demand for it is changing considerably. I mean, the big, brutish, oaky, massively fruity wines are kind of dying off, and everyone's kind of looking for something that's very well concentrated, insanely concentrated, but presented in more of a medium body, or something that your palate can enjoy a little bit more. And I think everyone's palates are growing in the market all over the world. And as that growth comes, you don't want those kind of big brutish wines anymore. I think wines used to be measured on how, if they were massively fruity and oaky and had alcohol, that was the measure of their quality and price point. And I'm really glad that the world is kind of changing. And I think wines like this, which is taking Sangio and showing its quality for being pretty and beautiful and clean and red fruity, but also having a bunch of different character between plums and cherries. And I mean, I love how there's a little bit of bramble and dried raspberry. I love there's like almost like a rosemary kind of essence to it, like if you ever had rosemary oil before, like just a little bit of that into it. But what I love the most about all that is that it remains extremely fresh and kind of intense, but like has that Sangio intensity, but it's just fresh and beautiful. This is my
so distinct from classic Chianti, where it has that dusty dryness. Maremma is so much more generous. It gives you more cherry and blackberry. I would say in some cases currant. I don't think this actually has currant. I would say the curranty fruit tends to come from more the flatland, lowland, river valley stuff that's a little cheaper. This tends to be more cleaner berries.
I just think the winemaking style has such a deft hand. It's such a pretty, wonderful thing to drink. And I can't think of a moment in time if I felt like a red wine where that one wouldn't, serve me perfectly with basically anything I eat. Or if I'm I find that it offers the ability to just drink on its own. So and also the production isn't small. I mean, they make 15,000 cases of wine. It's their largest production bottling. And I mean, if you consider 15,000 cases, you, Devin, and myself could run a winery that produces 15,000 cases and do all of the winemaking. So it's still not a tremendous amount of wine to produce. I mean, even if we were really willing to work, we could maybe do 15,000 cases between the two of us as winemakers. So it's still not very much, but at the same time, it's very available. And Sorry, it's still rare in this market because we're the only importers in Alberta. There's another importer in BC, and then you don't see this wine across Canada. And I feel like we're really lucky to have it. And also, this being the introductory wine at this price point and its concentration, the ones that are above it, there's a Reserva, and there's one called Poggia Valente, which is made more in kind of a Brunello style. And then the flagship wine, which has gotten 100 points from Parker and Suckling for, I think, 6 vintages in a row or something like that she makes. I don't get to drink that wine very often because we're only allocated 13 cases. I don't know why it's 13, but 13 cases per year. It's just such a wicked, wonderful, rare, and well-priced wine. I mean, on your shelf, I believe that is $24, right?
Yeah, $24.95. You're quite right.
Yeah,
yep.
So I'm proud to have it. I think Elisabetta is a wonderful woman, and everything about that wine just sings buy it all and drink it all day to me.
Okay, you invited the question, and I think it'll be our last question for tonight, unless we get something from the audience. You invoked the name Robert Parker, and we've just spent the last 10 minutes talking about the making wine to a certain standard that appealed to a certain palate. Are you as glad as I am that the Parkerization of wine is dead and gone? Because I really am looking forward to drinking more wines that aren't 14.5% alcohol and just fruit and oak and nothing else.
I mean, that's a double-edged sword because unfortunately, the way the climate's going, you're going to be drinking 14.5% alcohol wine.
There is that, yes.
Which really sucks. But yeah, I mean, high alcohol affects the subtlety of the fruit, and high alcohol wines basically taste like shit. So let's be perfectly honest. I mean,
put that one on the best of hits list. We need that. Yeah.
Like it's ridiculous. I mean, you have to basically what happens if there's too much alcohol, then you have to find a way to hone that to make it not alcohol-y, and that just makes no sense. I mean, the great wines, and I'm sure you agree, start at 9.5%, which is, in my opinion, probably the most important and flavorful grape on the planet is Riesling. You don't need alcohol to make incredible wine, so that's not the point. Alcohol, the ferment, and the quality of the yeast you use and the people who are making it is what's important. And as soon as there's too much alcohol, the wine is ruined. So yeah, I'm very happy about it. The only thing about wine ratings and Parker and all that stuff is there's a really strong positive that came from it, which is exposure and confidence to the purchaser, which no one ever had before. Nope. The fault of it is that magazines like Wine Spectator and Robert Parker unfortunately exposed the wines to us and gave us confidence to purchase them because you were able to read what they were. Like if I read a write-up on a wine, there'll be subtle clues to me that will personally, I'll try any wine because wine is experiential, but is whether or not subjectively I like it, that's a whole different story. But if I was choosing something that I like, having 8 people taste it and write about it, it gives me a good idea of what might be in there, which I like. But the bad part about it is that all of that made every wine more expensive because wine used to be so much less money until these magazines started controlling the market. And we learned, but then we also have to pay so much for that education, which is really kind of shit.
I don't know. I actually love the experiential point of wine. I love tasting things like Copper Moon's It's an Orange Wine, but not an orange wine. When I heard about it, I had to try it. I had to. It was such a terrible idea. Hey, it's an orange wine, but it's not an orange wine because orange wines are sour and bitter and gross. But this is the same thing, except we're marketing it as the pumpkin spice latte of wine. It was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard, so I had to try it. I don't care about very adequate $16.95 Italian Pinot Grigio. When I hear Copper Moon's making an orange wine or a famous Bordeaux estate is making a cheap rosé, I have to try those because they're so dumb they either have to be good or, oh my God, they're going to be so bad. Yeah. I just don't care about the middle ground. I just want to see all these stupid ideas, and a significant proportion of the time, they're going to be brilliant.
Yeah. I like that too. I mean, the popularity of the natural thing and the pet nat and orange wines and things like that is really cool. I think it's also helping drive sales for the wines that are all about quality. I mean, as you had mentioned, you don't carry a lot of Bordeaux. I'm very bullish on Bordeaux, and I mean, if we could sit down and do one of these for 3 times the price and go through, like, for instance, Pessac and try 4 Pessac wines, you will see, I mean, the amount of concentration is second to none. I mean, the wines, there's a reason why it is such an acclaimed area. It isn't simply because of demand, and there's people for centuries who've been refining their art there, and the people who make the wine there are dealing with the greatest growers, the best farmers, the best pickers, the best laborers, and they're creating some of the best art in the world, in my opinion. And so I think it's cool to be fun and new and, play a little punk rock, but I also really enjoy classical music, if that makes sense.
We literally went with Provence, Bordeaux, and the oldest wine producing region in, Maremma. We're not really, this is a little punk rock, but, and again, 40, 50 years ago, making Bordeaux white that didn't suck was pretty punk rock, but this isn't a desperately punk rock tasting, and I'm okay with that, because these wines ruled. Daryl, thank you so much for joining us. This was absolutely amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Kyle. You're such a wonderful host, and I hope everyone was able to enjoy the tasting today. I hope you understand, too. I'm proud to be here and be able to do this with you guys, and I'd love the opportunity to do it again, so thank you kindly.
Cool. Stick around. You and I are going to kind of debrief after. We'll hang out, have a glass of wine. But for the rest of you folks at home, I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton. This was Dale Drenville with Lanigan-Edwards Wine and Spirits. All of these wines are, I don't think yet on the shelf, but we'll get them there by Monday because we kind of had the wine set aside for the tasting. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you all for joining us. It's a hot Friday night in August. I know you all have other things you could be doing. I really appreciate you joining us. Have a wonderful night.